Yeah, so tonight's speaker is Michael Goldstein. He is an MHAA member. Michael moved to Greene County in the spring of 2023, and he took a delivery of his first telescope in September of that same year. He avidly practices EAA, electronically assisted astrophotography, which is basically real-time astrophotography. And from his Bortle 4 Skies backyard, he has managed to observe more than 110 targets, cataloged in the Halton Arps Atlas of Peculiar Galaxies. Michael's also an avid wild trout fisherman and originally taught himself to use the geographic information systems in order to map trout streams. So in New York, he focused on identifying wild populations of brook trout. And when he's traveling out west, he's looking for aboriginal populations of native cutthroat trout. Michael's presentation tonight is titled Dark Skies in Mid-Hudson Valley and Catskills. It's about his recent efforts to identify and catalog dark sky locations in the area. And he will be introducing 6 dark skies. There may be more coming in future. But 6 dark skies currently open to the public. He's going to discuss their strengths, weaknesses, and provide specific details. So hopefully we can all take advantage of that in our, whether we do astrophotography or just direct observing, and use it for ourselves. So with that, welcome, Michael.
Hi, everybody. So that's quite an audience. Folks are interested in dark skies. Who wants dark skies? Hey, everybody does. Okay. So this talk is going to talk about a systematic search for dark skies in the Mid-Hudson Valley. And I'm going to spend about 5 minutes talking about a little project I put together, a little more time about kind of a high-level context of what we found. Because it turns out that the Hudson Valley is a really remarkable place. And so I wanted, before I dove into like 6 places where you can find dark skies specifically, I wanted to put it in the larger context. And then I also want to spend a little time at the end kind of posing how this might, once we understand where these skies are in the context of dark skies in the United States, how that might affect our program. More at the level of a question than an answer, for sure. Okay, but I've been really interested in dark skies. I moved here, as Bart said, in 2023. And actually, going back in 2021, I was planning to build a house on some land I owned in Ulster County. And I also knew I wanted to get involved in EAA, but that lot was not going to allow me to observe very well because it's a very wooded lot and I needed the trees for privacy. So I started looking for dark sites on the internet and really couldn't come up with much at all that was close by. I mean, I did discover MHAA when I searched, but that was Lake Tacanic. That was an hour. That wasn't super interesting to me at that point. Now, in the end, I did not build on that site. I ended up selling the land and buying a house, which had a great view of the sky. That is from my backyard, that photograph. That's just with my iPhone of a partial lunar eclipse. But I never forgot how much I was desperate to find some dark sites and couldn't find it. So when I started working, getting involved with MHAA, which I did about a year afterwards, I thought what I really should do is put together a search driven off of geographic information system. People familiar with GIS, or some people not familiar? Okay, a few people didn't raise their hand. Okay, GIS is basically a computer application. Simplistically, you could think of it as a word processor for maps. Okay, instead of creating a document, you're creating a specific kind of map, but it actually is a lot deeper than that because it gives you the ability to manipulate georeference data and use that to determine what you create. And the there's kind of an amazing subculture around GIS where there's a ton of money, rather a ton of data that's just free. And a lot of that comes out of federal funding. Basically, anytime the feds give you money to create geographic information system, it's put into the public domain. All the USGS data is in the public domain, and you can just go on the web, download it totally legally, and work on it. And so there's a real value. I mean, everyone has seen web maps, right? But a GIS is way more valuable than a web map for two reasons, really. One is you can query the key layer. So in particular, in this search, you can only make it a dark site if the public can get access to it, right? So you're interested in public land. So you could query public land. And in the back of my head, when I started this, it seemed like, well, not only that, but you need to get access at night and you'd be able to spend all night there. And that told me, oh, campgrounds would be a good idea. Now I'll come back to that in a second. So essentially what you want to be able to do is be able to query layers and then control how they will be able to get a nice view of them. So if you put the public lands on top of the view of the light pollution, you can see, oh, there's a dark area and there's a campground or there's a park. And you can do that much more easily than if you're trying to juggle a couple of web maps. Now, it turned out, I mentioned, Bart mentioned that I'm an avid wild trout fisherman. And one of the things I did when I moved to the Catskills is I built a GIS project to find wild brook trout streams. And it turns out that about 90% of that directly applies to this because, you know, all the base maps, all the aerial imagery works for it. You need to know public lands to see if you can get access to a stream that holds brook trout. So, I mean, the brook trout specific data is kind of useless for this purpose, but everything else played. So really all I needed to do was take that project, turn off the brook trout data and get a light pollution layer. So I went looking for GIS. That's not something that USGS has, but there's an academic in University of Michigan, a guy named David Lorenz, who has updated a very famous light pollution work by an Italian scientist. Turns out if you go on the web and you see these light pollution things, almost all of them are still using Pieratiano Cinzano's original work, which goes back, I think, to the 90s. But anyway, David has updated it and he makes it available. He's a great guy. Talked to him about what we were trying to do. And he gave me a little help. But anyway, I've got his stuff in that workstation. And then basically the process is you go through, you've got a workstation and you start searching for the intersection of public land with dark areas. And then and by the way, I did a post on Cloudy Nights with some preliminary stuff. And I want to give a shout out to Phil Perry. I don't know if he's in the audience. Phil used to be a member and then I think is now again a member. Anyway, he told me about the Ashokan Reservoir, and we'll come back to that. And that said, oh, you know, we're not just interested in campsites. There are other kinds of places that are going to be useful in all this, like the New York City recreation areas, of which the Ashokan Reservoir is one of them. There are historic sites. There are a bunch of other different kinds of parks, not just campgrounds. So that caused me to broaden my search. Anyway, I came up with roughly 9 candidates, and then I visited each site to make sure that what I saw on the maps and in the aerial imagery, you know, you do things, you look for wide open spaces and so forth. And I ended up qualifying 6 sites, and we'll go back to them. But so in the balance of this talk, we're going to talk about how unique the Mid-Hudson Valley is. We're going to talk about how the public lands have made a huge difference, both to access, the fact that things are dark now, and then finally just touch on how this might affect our mission. Okay, so it's an extraordinary resource. People have heard of border levels? Raise hands. Okay, most people know about border levels. Okay, I think there's a nice illustration that ESA creates, which sort of shows Bortle 1 all the way at the left, all the way to Bortle 8, 9, with kind of a simulation of what you would see in the sky. Those colors are the colors in the maps that David had created. So we're going to see those colors a lot. Just, you know, and they're sort of common sense. Bortle 1, the darkest, are sort of the black and the gray. Bortle 2 are the blues. Darker blue is darker than the lighter blue, but they're both Bortle 2. Bortle 3 are the greens, the bright greens. Bortle 4 is mostly that kind of mustard green, a little bit of the yellow. So those colors don't exactly map to Bortles, but they're close enough for our purposes here. Okay, when you think about skies in the United States, what you have to think about is the fact that the eastern and western US are very different. Kind of the dividing line is the Mississippi River. And if you look at darkness west of the Mississippi, there's a whole lot more dark area than there is east of the Mississippi. And really, the eastern US is one of the most light polluted places in the world. I mean, other than Central Europe, it's about as bad as it gets. Now, just again, a reminder of what those colors mean. You know, black and blue is good, but of course, when you see it kind of close on, you're really just several miles out to sea, which doesn't do you much good, right? If you look along the East Coast. So basically, most of the good parts of the East Coast are Bortle 4 or low Bortle 5. Let's look at New Jersey for a moment. I moved here from New Jersey. One of the problems you've got in New Jersey and much of the East Coast is that the Bortle descriptions really don't apply. I mean, one of the reasons I think the Bortle scale is so popular is it's understandable. You say, okay, a rural sky is Bortle 3, okay, and then a brighter rural sky is Bortle 4. Not New Jersey. And actually most of the East Coast. I've marked here on this map Sussex County, which is the far northwest. I've also marked the Pine Barrens. Those are 2 of the most rural places in New Jersey. And they ain't Bortle 3, they're actually Bortle 5, if you just look at the brightness of the sky. Now, I love New Jersey. I lived there much of my life. And I'm not picking on it. Let's look at southern New England, equally challenged. even the most remote parts of the Taconics and the Berkshires are at best Bortle 3.5. If you look at Rhode Island, it's basically only Bortle 5. If you look at Eastern Massachusetts, it's all Bortle 5, 6, 7, and higher. In fact, the only Bortle 3 is a tiny, and it's not, if you look at that island far in the bottom right-hand corner, that's Nantucket Island. And it looks like there's a one place on the beach in eastern Nantucket where you get Bortle 2. New York City and Boston, and I'm going to come back to this, do better than most other eastern cities because of the proximity to the White Mountains or the Green Mountains, or in the case of New York, specifically the Catskills, which is where we are. So you see that kind of blue heart of the Catskills. The Bortle, Mid-Hudson Valley, if you can define what the boundary you'd like, but it's pretty much majority of the skies are Bortle 4 or better. And you've got Bortle 2 within 100 miles of Times Square. So, question, how unusual are Bortle 2 skies within the eastern US? There are 11 eastern states that have no Bortle 2 skies. Or better, right? They are Bortle 3 or worse. Now, we've talked about southern New England. We've talked about New Jersey, Delaware. Okay, it's right next to New Jersey. Maryland, I was a little surprised because if you know Maryland, of course, Eastern Maryland would be bright, but Western Maryland, you think of as pretty rural. It jams up against West Virginia, but it still does not have any Bortle 2 skies. Ohio has none, but the last 4 I put in red because it shocked me when I realized this. I think of South Carolina, Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee as all pretty rural states, and none of them have any Bortle 2 or better skies. So if you think about it, Mid-Hudson, we are blessed within a few minutes of here to be able to get the skies that are brighter than in 11 states in the eastern US. Darker, yes. Okay, now one of the things you discover when you look at this is that many of the eastern mountain ranges aren't particularly dark. Now, I actually looked at posting the Appalachian Trail on this. I decided it would take me 2 hours, and I didn't think it was worth doing it for this scale, for this one slide. But if you look, you see how on the Blue Ridge, if you kind of follow that line to the Allegheny and Appalachian, there's that blue area. Well, it turns out the Appalachian Trail doesn't go through that. It takes a little jog to the right, I think because it's picking up Shenandoah National Park. And because of that, most through hikers start in Georgia. And they'll start in the early spring and they'll work up and they'll go north. If you do that, which is probably 90% of through hikers, the route they take, they don't hit Bortle 2 till they get to Vermont. I mean, it's really astonishing if you think about that. I was astonished. Okay, so what city on the East Coast is closest to Bortle 2? Do anyone want to take a guess? I'm going to ask, let's pick the winner and let's pick the top 4. So closest, just distance from the city to Bortle 2, anywhere east of the Mississippi, big city. Any guesses on which one is closest?
Burlington.
Okay, we got a guess on New York. That's not it. Well, Albany's too small. I'm talking big cities like Philly, New York, Boston, that kind of stuff. I was actually astonished by the answer to it. But any other guesses? Pittsburgh is what I would have guessed. Syracuse is too small. Okay, here we are. Turns out it's Miami. And the reason it's Miami, because you've got the Everglades National Park just west. Now, I almost disqualified it because most of it is inaccessible by automobile, right? But it turns out there's one place, one road that kind of sneaks underneath it and goes up so you can get into Bortle too. So I included it. It's actually drive miles at 70. I put a box around those because I think they're tied effectively. You got Pittsburgh, but it's 90 miles. It's as far to get to Bortle 2 from Pittsburgh as it is to get, New York is 95, okay? But the New York roads are better. If you go to Boston, you go 90 miles, but actually you're going to the Green Mountains in Vermont, and I've done that drive, and it's a terrible drive, and it's slower than it would be to get here from the GW Bridge. So it's just astonishing that New York is tied for second as the closest to Bortle 2, given how big we are. Now, here are the other cities that I looked at. I mean, Chicago is almost twice as far from Bortle 2. Even Minneapolis, which I thought would be pretty close, is not. So again, this is sort of a remarkable thing. And of course, the reason for it is that New York is so close to this stuff is the Mid-Hudson Valley and the Catskills. And why is it? Why does it stay so dark? Well, I think the answer is partly luck, but it's also significantly 140-year history of some enlightened management. So let's talk about that. That dotted line are the boundaries of the Catskill Park. So the Catskill Park was created in 1884, and it was because lumber companies bought up the Catskills and the Adirondacks, and they clear cut them. And then after they clear cut them, they abandoned them, and they eroded badly, and they silted New York Harbor, and the New York Harbor folks got really pissed off. So they got the state legislature, the lumber companies stopped paying taxes, so they got the state to foreclose on them and threw them into a wilderness area called the Catskill and the Adirondack Park. And a few years later, they wrote that into the state constitution so it couldn't be undone. So New York has the largest and oldest state wilderness in the country. And that's a huge part of this. And then the second big thing that happened, in part because of the restoration of those mountains, because they were now wilderness, is New York City decided to get its water from here. So the first reservoir was the Ashokan Reservoir, started in 1907, completed about, I think, 10 years later. And over the years, between 1907 and 1955, they built a total of 6 reservoirs. And that kind of whitish area, that is the drainage area. That is the land that feeds water into the reservoirs and into, in effect, the New York City water supply. And so there are development restrictions in that entire area. And what you discover is that purple is preserved public land. And a huge portion of it is preserved public land. And by the way, those acquisitions are still happening. New York City has the largest unfiltered public water supply in the United States, maybe the world. And it would cost, if you look at debt service plus operating costs, about $1 billion a year if they had to operate a filtered water supply out of the Catskills. So they work really hard to keep unwanted development happening. And so they're constantly acquiring new land and new leases to limit the damage to the water supply. That has a huge impact on our ability to have dark skies. So we live next to a kind of a miraculous area. So let's talk about the 6 places we've found. And we had a pretty simple definition of it. We wanted sites that were at least sort of Bortle 3.5, low end of 4 would be okay. But the keys were they had to be accessible to the public at night, which screws up a lot of things. And obviously they needed a good view of the sky. And since the Catskills are mountainous and wooded, there are a lot of great places that you would love to be, but you don't get a good view of the sky. So I'm going to go through the 6, but there are brochures on our website that you can download. That's a QR code for them. And the brochures kind of all look like this. They're 2 pages. They show you where it is. They give you a lot of basic information. They give you a sense of the horizons that you go to, and they tell you specifically where the good viewing locations are within each site. Okay, so the first I'm going to talk about is the Ashokan Reservoir. Again, I want to give a shout out to Phil Perry, who brought this to my attention. It's kind of ironic that we owe, I think, the fact that it exists at all to the New York City water supply in significant measure. And here you're actually observing from a causeway that runs on top of the earthen dam that creates the reservoir. And so you actually have a fantastic view in 4 directions. I picked this one because it's the prettiest, but the southern exposure is fantastic. You can view down to almost 5 degrees. Not that you would want to if you could avoid it, but occasionally that's useful. One of the things that's great about it is you just go there. There's a parking lot at the end of this causeway. It's free. There's nothing you have to do in terms of permit. You just park and haul your stuff out a few hundred yards on a paved path and set up. And so it's real simple. It is cold. You get wind off the reservoir and it is freezing, even in the fall or the spring. But, dress warmly. Okay, second site, Colgate Lake. Colgate Lake is kind of tucked in near Hunter. Folks, it's sort of between Wyndham and Hunter. It's kind of halfway in between. Again, it's a nice stark area. This is not a normal campsite, but it is a wilderness area. It's a recreation area. It's mostly used in the summer by people swimming in Colgate Lake. But it's kind of got a big open cleared area. If you schlep your stuff up the hills, you can set up out the hills and again, get good views, 360 degrees basically. The only thing is you need to be prepared that it's not paved. You're going to have to schlep your stuff over these hills and fields, but not too bad. If you get a wide-wheeled garden cart, you can get your stuff up there. Little Pond, this is the first of the campgrounds. This is kind of near the source of the Beaver Kill, if you guys know trout streams. This is in the far western part of the Catskills. This is in the heart of the blue area. So it's truly Bortle 2. Now, campgrounds are good and bad. They're good because you can spend the night if you want to. They're bad because they're a little more bureaucratic, and you need to have a camping permit in order to be sure you can spend the night there. Now, that is at the discretion of the campground manager. And what I found going to a bunch of campgrounds, the guy who is currently running Little Pond is a stargazer. He was so thrilled when I told him about Bortle 2 and the fact this was coming. So if, assuming he stays the manager, you can just go there and he's going to help you out. And you just pay a day use fee and you can spend the night to heart's content imaging. You're going to be imaging over the pond, which can create some problems because of temperature differential between the water and the air. But it does give you a nice open view. And while you're somewhat restricted, because you can see trees are actually pretty close, there are places to set up on both sides of the pond. So if you want to do I think we're looking, which way? We're 330. So we are looking west right now, kind of straight up the lake. So that would be, I guess, south. That would be north. Anyway, you can get about half the sky from one side of the lake. You can set up on the other side of the lake and get the other half of the sky. And if you're a fisher person, you can, during the day, if you actually camp there, you can go on the beaver kill and go fishing. It's about a 10-minute drive away. Okay, Mongop Pond. This is a solid Bortle 3. It's, remember I showed you that photograph? You saw like a wooden pier overlooking a lake. There's a few slides back. That was at Mongop Pond as one of the places you could set up. There's also a beach that you can set up that's fairly open, so you've got a pretty good 360-degree view, but of course a fantastic view looking over the lake. Here, the management is not nearly as forgiving. So if you want to observe at night, you're going to need a reservation to observe. Now, if you avoid the big holiday weekends, it's not super busy, so you can probably get them. Anyway, but one thing that is pretty good, manager told me that important point, all the campgrounds, basically all the New York State campgrounds are open for camping from the weekend before Memorial Day weekend through the summer until mid-October, the weekend of Columbus Day. So during that period, if there are special rules, and there are day use fees, and some of them require that you actually get a camping permit. Outside of that period, it's just state land. So there's no requirement to pay a fee. You can't use any of the camping facilities, but you can just go. The bad news is many of them lock gates to keep cars out. So you may have to schlep your stuff a distance, which can vary. And this is all outlined in the different flyers, but you may have to schlep your stuff anywhere from a quarter of a mile to over a mile in the case of North-South Lake. But so one hand is, it's kind of a pain in the ass to schlep your stuff. On the other hand, you don't have to pay anything and you can just go and do it. So Mongop Pond this is a very dark site. Now, this is North-South Lake. There are actually two viewing locations in North-South Lake. One is from the old hotel site, the Catskill House Hotel site. That's where this photo was taken. Basically, you can look down at the eastern horizon. You're about 1,000 feet above the Hudson Valley there. And it's just got an incredible eastern view. This is really kind of almost Portal 4, but really pretty good. The other, and this is the place, if you're camping during season, you should use. The other place one could use in certain circumstances is the parking lot for South Lake. Now, the parking lot for South Lake is designed for day users, people who swim. It closes at sundown and they boot everyone out. So you can only use that either off season, or if we decided to negotiate as a club special rights. It turns out that there is a group called the Amateur Astronomers Association, which is a New York City club, and they have negotiated to do their star parties there. And the club has been offered the right to join them if on those same dates. There's some complications there and some negotiation. This, it turns out, is the busiest campground in the entire Southern District of New York area. They have as many campers in a season as I think everybody else put together. And so they're kind of a little more bureaucratic, but within that, they're pretty supportive. The bad news is off season, they close the gate right at the entrance to the park, and you've got to schlep stuff over a paved road to get to the parking lot for the South Lake parking lot, which is around a mile. So it's not a trivial commitment. But if we negotiate on this and to use it at the same times as the other guys, then we would get a key to that gate. So, but anyway, we'll come back to that. Okay, and then of course we've got Lake Taconic, which we've known for years. If folks don't know, if you join the MHAA, you get special access to this for free. I mean, it's available to anybody, but there's a permitting fee normally if you're not an MHAA member. So it's if you want to use Lake Taconic on your own, it's worth joining because it'll. It's the exact same fee. Yeah. And it's the only dark site that has its own exit from the Taconic Parkway. Yeah. So it's a very good site. It's not the prettiest, I will say. I mean, compared to the Ashokan Reservoir, I mean, it's not. There's a lot of asphalt, but it's all cool. Okay, so given the uniqueness, I hope this is going to work. Let's talk about dark skies in the context of the club's educational program. Now, this is a video I found online. I hope the audio is going to play when I hit this.
I can't believe I'm playing this for you. I have another one of these videos, this one from 87, of a suspicious object in the sky. Folks, this is Venus.
When things like this are happening, it seems everyone starts to look up, like my crew and I have been here in Mendham recording this video that you're looking at right now. We have no idea what it is, if it's a natural phenomenon, because it could be, but this is why so many municipalities are now asking people to reach out and send their videos to them or to
This is Venus.
who might be able to sort out what they're seeing in the skies. But I guarantee there's so many people looking up and making those recordings because mystery is one that needs to be solved.
Yeah. I mean, what do we say? What do we say about this?
For example, so other things we might be thinking about is, obviously we do a lot to try and promote at a general level. I don't know if we do very much specifically to build awareness about how unique the Hudson Valley is in the context of things. There also, I think, is a role for the club in advocating for more liberal astronomy access rules. For example, one of the sites I would love to do, there's a municipal park in Wyndham called CD Lane Park. Do people know it? It's on the road to the Big Hollow Trailhead. You pass it. Fabulous. It's the town water supply, fabulous open space, all kinds of great view, should be very dark, closes at sunset. So I don't know if we have any club members who are Wyndham residents. I'd love to go to with a Wyndham resident to talk to them about, could we work something out so people could observe there? That in combination with building awareness about how special things are and working with, say, visiting planning boards at some of the key towns and saying, hey, have you thought about how unique this treasure you have? And can you, in terms of building codes, do things to encourage people to preserve it? Anyway, I just close with a question. What could we be doing as a club to help preserve our dark skies? And I'm open to questions.
Questions in the room? Any questions? Oh, sorry. Thank you. Hi, thank you. That's great. Thank you very much. I live, I guess you would say, in the lower Hudson Valley and Cold Spring. But we do have Breakneck Ridge, which is a pretty cool site, even though it's maybe not as dark as the ones you were talking about. But I'm wondering if you're familiar with the planetarium and the observatory in Flagstaff, Arizona, and the International Dark Skies Initiative, because you were talking about advocacy there at the end, and I think they have some sort of like standardized guidelines for municipal development, and I wonder maybe the club could work with them or something like that. Oh, and one other thing, I'm wondering if you are aware of the Hudson Highlands Fjord Trail project and the impending environmental comment period, which is coming to a close. And I'm wondering if maybe dark skies might be a consideration there. Thank you.
Okay, so the last I'm not aware of, and maybe if there's a public comment, maybe we should make a comment. If you could, contact me or send it. If you go on the public list.io thing and put in a query about what you think makes sense, and one of us will see it.
Questions at MHA or mid-hudsonastro.org.
Yeah. Now you asked another question before that one.
Flagstaff, Arizona.
Oh, yes. There is a lot of stuff about responsible building practices. It's gone from kind of really rigid stuff to kind of more common sense stuff, but we could definitely pretty straightforwardly put together a presentation that we could give to a local planning board, which kind of combines some of this stuff about how unique this area is with the kinds of common sense things to encourage people to preserve it. So I absolutely agree with you with that.
Fantastic. I think maybe people are not aware what a treasure they have here.
I certainly wasn't. I mean, I thought it was pretty good. I mean, way good compared to New Jersey, but I didn't realize how unique this really is. I didn't realize it till I took a careful look at the other areas in preparing this talk. Even after I'd found the 6 sites, I hadn't really looked at the Mid-Hudson Valley in comparison to the rest of the East. And it's truly remarkable, I think.
Willie?
Have you considered the Shawangunk Grasslands Wildlife Preserve near Wallkill? Joe McCanya has gone down there, and they seem to be open to having people use it. It was a former Air Force base, so there's lots of open open space and concrete down there. And it looks like it's fairly accessible. Some negotiation would need to be made with the management, but they seem to be open. I don't know if Joe's followed up on that, but he was fairly impressed with the place.
I'd be happy to explore it. I mean, a lot of the land around the Gunks is Bortle 5. So it didn't make my first cut, but you know, there's always this trade-off between accessibility on the one hand and darkness on the other. So working something out would make a lot of sense, particularly for the folks who live close by.
Any other questions, either in the room or on the net? Whoop, Eric. David, you can.
Just a comment.
That's right.
Michael, the question I was going to ask is, or at least a comment, is that you had shown on your map for Lake Deconic area, some little light dome areas that were very poor Bortle numbers off to the north west or northwest, and also over Socrates area. And we see some of those up there at the park, and that they actually spread their light horizontally through the atmosphere toward the park itself. So it's interesting because otherwise most people think that, oh, well, light has to come from a major metropolitan area to be able to be affecting the skies that are near them. And that's not the case. It's right. It's much closer.
Particularly in conditions where you've got, you know, a little more moisture in the air than normal, or cloud reflecting off the clouds and things. But and in fairness, the satellite data doesn't do a great job of capturing that.
Have you tried any of the other reservoirs besides Ashokan, like the Neversink or Pepacton? I would think they would be pretty good too, if Ashokan is as good as you say it is.
I am actively searching for more sites. I have two that but neither of them is in the other list. But it's definitely on my list to explore. They tend, in my experience, just driving past, I don't see any sort of wide open areas to go, but that may just be my ignorance. So you know, if you know of a place by them, by all means, let us know and I'll go explore it.
Well, they look good, but I've never been there at night. But
oh well, if you're far to the that far west, and you're not in any right next to any town, they're for sure Bortle 3.5 and probably Bortle 3 at worst, and some will be in that blue Bortle 2 area.
I was given a map of the Catskills, a topographical map, a very highly detailed map. And I was looking at it and I was surprised to find that at Pepacton Reservoir, they had a little sign, a little comment saying on the map saying that this was the darkest place in the Catskills.
Okay, it could be.
Me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
One thing I'll note real quick, just off the side, is that there's a lot of apps for this, but we have a common one that we call Astrospheric. It's a lovely thing. If you're a member of the group, you get a little bit advanced version of it, but it has a layer for light pollution on it as well. And you can locate these areas that you'd be interested in and see how dark they actually are. I was going to toss it up on the screen, but it'd probably take me too long to switch the screens around again to get it right. But I can show anyone who's interested in that on my mobile later if you'd like. Yes.
I do know a place, White Pond. It's on Hosner Mountain. That's actually 24-hour, no permit required. And they have a wooden pier, little dock you can set up on.
Cool. Now, where is that?
It's on Hosner Mountain in Stormville.
Okay, I don't know
White
where
Pond.
that's south of here or?
Stormville,
I
like
think it
the
is a little
Stormville
south.
Airport area. Yeah, it's 82-ish.
It's going 52 up
Yeah,
towards
52.
Parma.
Okay. Can you, I won't remember, can someone? Okay, thanks.
I can give a little guidance into that topic. Besides state parks, recreation and historical sites organizations, the DEC also has some properties. Some of them are campgrounds, but most of them are things like multiple use areas, state forests, wildlife management areas. And these have basically almost no rules that would affect the kinds of things we use. They say no motorized vehicles behind their gates, and they have locked gates. If you have a wheel dolly that you can haul your equipment with, you can take that kind of thing up. They don't want you to build there, for example, so no permanent structures. If you want to camp, the only thing they want is if you have more than 20 people, get a permit. And they provide a way. I've posted a link in our chat online, which will disappear at the end of our meeting here. But you can grab it to see what the rules are. And it will give you a way to start looking for what properties the DEC has. So you can look for their forests and MUAs, multiple use areas, etc., to see what's where. There's a few that are in in Dutchess County, in the north end of the county, which aren't bad, that have some open skies. One of the downsides with these is they tend to be heavily forested.
Yeah, Carnegie Lake is one of those recreation areas, and they do allow what they call primitive camping. There are no facilities for it, but you can pitch a tent. If you actually want to camp, they want you to get a permit even for one night. But if you just go and set up your telescope and aren't really camping, but you're observing, there are absolutely no restrictions to it. So actually, when I first started, I was focused on campgrounds. Kind of in this next wave, I'm focused on looking for those kind of recreation areas. And one of the places I have in mind is actually an historic park, but it has huge fields and it's in a very nice dark area. So again, state land, but I'm not going to call it out till I talk to the rangers there. In general, I've gotten fabulous support from the park rangers. They are very sympathetic, and most of them are stargazing enthusiasts. So they want this to happen, and they've been very helpful. Even if the rules, like at North-South Lake, were kind of restrictive, they kind of want to work with you. So I ended up having about a 45-minute conversation with the regional manager that North-South Lake reports to, who offered to make the South Lake parking lot available to us as long as we coordinated with the New York City Club and did it on the same dates.
I've got two comments. First of all, you don't know about Stormville, but Stormville is, I understand, where John Bortle was from, of the Bortle scale. He's local, and he was a member of our club, I think, at one point long ago. The other is we have this stargazing permit from Lake Taconic State Park that the club pays for every year, and members of our club can then use that. And Steve has set up the website so you can get a copy printed out with the date of your intended visit. And I assumed that was a New York State thing, but it's not. It's specific to Lake Taconic. And I found that out, I think, when I was talking to people at Sam's Point about trying to do something similar, and they didn't know anything about it. And they're willing to work with us. And they want to charge for parking because their parking lot is not as big as Lake Taconic. But so what I realized is Lake Taconic has this great stargazing permit system that's just them. And maybe we can encourage the other parks. And I understand they're not all New York State parks either. Some of them are in other state departments. Is that right? The conservation or the
Well, there are a lot of New York City Department of Conservation within the Catskill Park.
Okay.
Because New York City bought up.
So that's a New York City department and then the New York State parks. And so, okay, so.
But what I discovered in talking to the.
It'll get us both.
What I had discovered talking to the managers of the campgrounds is the managers of the campground, especially in the smaller ones, have enormous discretion on how they manage it.
Okay.
North South Lake, because it's the largest in the system, they are sort of the regional manager plays a huge role in managing that. But some of the others, the smaller ones, kind of whatever the manager wants to do,
And
they can do.
they're kind of winging it.
And they're sort of winging it, and some of them are wildly enthusiastic and some of them aren't.
So maybe the fact that Taconic has already set up this program and made it work, maybe others would follow.
I'm sure
Yeah.
you could find folks who would be willing to do it. I shared our permit with the regional manager
Okay.
for North South Lake. And he was empathetic, but he said, nah, it's just.
It's not the same. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
yeah. Okay.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. I wait my way back to the lectern. I'd like to thank everyone for attending, especially the visitors tonight. We usually run up to Pasquale's for a little extra pizza and a little extra chat afterwards. Everyone's welcome to join us if you'd like. So with that, I'll close the meeting out and we'll see everybody back here next month. Thank you.